I'm joined in the studio now by the Finance Minister Mathias Cormann. Senator Cormann, welcome to Capitol Hill.
Good to be here.
What other options are on the table if you can't get many of your budget measures through?
Well, what is on the table right now is a budget that we delivered about 2 months ago, and of course the Senate should pass the budget we delivered because it's a budget Australia needs.
But the Treasurer did mention you could look in other areas at things that don't require legislation, so presumably that's payments to the states, payments to local governments, payments you make such as the chaplaincy program.
Well, it's not our preferred option to look at other options. Our preferred option is for the Senate to pass the budget Australia needs to protect living standards and to build opportunity for the future. But of course, as the Treasurer has indicated this morning, if the Senate doesn't leave us with any choice, if the Senate doesn't leave us with any alternative, we might not have any option other than to look at other options. Now,
So what could be those other options?
Well, I'm not going to speculate here and now. What I would say, though, is the Labor Party and the Greens right now want the Australian government to keep borrowing from our children and from our grandchildren to fund consumption today. Can you just imagine? There would not be a single parent in Australia that would expect their children to pay off their credit card after they've put a large chunk of their grocery bills on that credit card year in, year out, taken out a second credit card to pay the interest on the first. Not a single parent would expect their children to pay off that credit card in those circumstances. Neither should the Australian government.
You've made those arguments before. I just want to get an idea of what the possible options are. Are they the things I mentioned? Things like payments to the states, payments to local governments, things that don't come under the heading of grants?
Well, we want the Australian Senate to be very clear that they might think that the measures in our budget were tough, but if we don't make those decisions now, the decisions will only become tougher, because our overarching commitment is to do what we promised the Australian people we would do, and that is to repair the budget. I mean, Wayne Swan...
Is this a real threat, or is it just bluster, just trying to pressure the Senate?
It is not a threat. It is a reality. I mean, Wayne Swan, year in, year out, kept telling us why a budget surplus was so important for Australia, why it was so important for families around the kitchen table. At least he was a believer. He never quite managed to deliver a budget. He delivered $191 billion in budget deficits in his first 5 budgets, another $123 billion in projected deficits in his last budget. But at least Wayne Swan believed in a surplus. Bill Shorten and Chris Bowen are just playing politics with the national interest. They are completely reckless and irresponsible, even worse than the right and Gillard
Just for clarity, are things like grants to the states, grants to local government, payments for things like chaplaincy program, they're things you don't need to legislate, are they? They're the sorts of things you could look at.
Well, Lyndal, you can ask that question in however many ways you like. We're not going to speculate today. All we're saying, and it is a statement of fact...
You're just going to raise the general option, but not say exactly what the result might look like if you go ahead with it.
What we are putting to you and to the Australian people is that if the Senate doesn't allow us to fix the budget in the way that was put forward in the budget, because Labor right now is blocking nearly $40 billion in savings measures, including $5 billion in savings measures they themselves initiated and banked in their last budget. If you want any further evidence that Labor under Bill Shorten is playing politics with the national interest, look no further than the $5 billion in Labor savings that they are now blocking in the Senate. They're being reckless and irresponsible.
You've been able to negotiate a deal with Labor on the Qantas Sales Act. Labor will support something like the change to the family tax benefit, I think Part B threshold, going from $150,000 to $100,000. So Labor's supporting some of the things, aren't they?
Well, Labor left behind a debt and deficit disaster after completely mismanaging public money over 6 years in government. We are taking responsibility to fixing up the mess they left behind, and instead of helping clean up the Labor mess, Bill Shorten is making things worse. He's even more reckless and more irresponsible than Kevin Rudd, Wayne Swan and Julia Gillard.
If I could go quickly to a couple of other matters. Under the Future of Financial Advice changes, under those rules, including the Palmer United Party changes, can a financial advisor providing general or individual advice get a form of payment, be it a commission, an incentive, a bonus or top-up, for recommending a particular product or set of products that the person getting the advice does not know about?
They cannot receive any conflicted remuneration, and of course all of the disclosure...
Not in any case, not for general advice, not for specific personal advice?
Conflicted remuneration was banned banned. It is a ban that we supported. It continues to be banned. And in our we're not suggesting that banks and others should not be allowed to sell product. We're not suggesting that banks and others should not be able to pay their employees for providing services. What we are saying, and what we've made extremely clear and put beyond doubt in our regulations, is that any such payment cannot be made in a form that would conflict the advice given. That is explicit in our regulations and in our improvements.
Should one of the options raised by the Financial Systems Inquiry yesterday of saying calling general advice sales be taken up to make it clear that distinction?
Well, the definition in relation to general advice now is the exact same definition as existed under the previous government. I mean, whatever recommendations the Financial Systems Inquiry puts forward, we will obviously consider them in the ordinary course of events and provide a proper and considered response. But the important point here is, though, we have always supported the ban on conflicted remuneration. That ban remains in place, irrespective of the inaccurate and dishonest assertions that are made by the Labor Party at various times.
On the carbon tax, when the carbon tax goes, how much will the economy grow? How many jobs will be created by getting rid of it?
The Parliamentary Budget Office showed in their pre-election costings that there will be a significant growth dividend from scrapping the carbon tax. And of course, they estimated just the revenue impact for the government on the back of stronger economic growth to be $1.1 billion over the forward estimates. Now, I mean, if you get rid of a tax that reduces our international competitiveness, if you get rid of a tax that reduces the cost of doing business, if you get rid of a tax that helps businesses in Australia compete better with businesses in other parts of the world, they will be able to attract more investment and create more jobs. And that is why we're doing it.
One final question very quickly, because we are out of time. Will you at any stage move this week to gag debate on the carbon tax in the Senate?
Well, what we see in the Senate right now is yet another Labor-Green filibuster.
Will you seek to bring it to an end at any stage?
We have not put any time management motions in place, and these are matters for others. But right now, I mean, what we have said is that we will continue this debate. We will persist with this debate until the carbon tax is gone. And if the Labor Party and the Greens want to continue to defy the will of the Australian people, that is a matter for them.
Mathias Cormann, thank you very much for your time.
Always good to be here.
Some senators